Still, he felt, well, if so many people were all touched by these theosophic ideas, if for them that is the fulfillment of their spiritual life, all right, I'll have to cope with that, try them to inspire them in their own way. That's what the mystic would do. So let them go along their own track, let them find their fulfillment according to their own hopes, expectations, and visions. But today, we really have to, I think, take leave of that term, the Sufi message, and the Sufi messenger. I say that's pure neo-religion, pure and simple, and that's the very opposite of what Hazrat Inayat Khan himself intended. When you think of Hazrat Inayat Khan's work, and when you read his lectures in the many publications you find today, then always keep in mind, it's not at all the messenger speaking on a podium and speaking to thousands of people and proclaiming a new message of wonderful new spiritual insight and whatever. Think of the Indian guru with the circle of his chelas around him. Think of the Indian murshid with the circle of murids around him. And they sit together in their ashram or in the khanka, a large hall where everybody can come at any time, and where, as likely as not, the murshid or the guru will come every day to sit with that little circle of murids around him. On the end, that's a very open space. All kinds of people may pass through it. You have all kinds of talking women and screaming children, which might also somewhere be in the neighborhood. It's just open and informal and kind of, at the same time, in that easy circle, which meets day after day, and the murshid talks, and he speaks, and suddenly, in the midst of his discussion, he thinks of a pleasant happening or an anecdote or something which happened, and he suddenly goes off in that direction. He starts telling stories, or lightening the depth and the solemnity of what he says by some kind of incidental things. And that exactly you find in Hazrat Inayat Khan's work as well. So, again, not the great speaker to thousands of people proclaiming a new world order or new religious order. The teacher who trains a certain group of people first in the sense of developing their understanding, and then in ever further in direction of mystical realization. And you see, one of the distinctions, as I said, Sufism came out of the Western tradition. And Hazrat Inayat Khan has the following to say about it. He says, Sufism was intellectually born in Arabia, devotionally reared in Persia, and spiritually completed in India. That means to say, intellectually born in Arabia, you have to forget about, all the sand and all the Bedouins. He means the Baghdad civilization, which integrated the whole culture deriving from the Mediterranean, Egypt and Greece. Then, of course, the culture of the Middle East and all its religious and contemplative ideas. All that flourished during that Baghdad period, the great time of the Baghdad civilization, in which the Arabic and the Persian already mingled. Then, of course, the emphasis goes to Persia, and Murshid is devotionally reared in Persia. What did he mean by that? He meant that by devotion, that means you are devoted to something of beauty, something which you are devoted to something which in your sentiment is beautiful, is meaningful. In other words, through devotion, you already abandon a bit of your self-awareness in order to admire, to focus something which, overtakes you, which you find a fulfilling experience. Therefore, devotion, you could also have said, aesthetically raised in Persia, because, of course, in the beauty of Persian poetry, Sufism acquired a whole new dimension of spiritual insight and intuition. Then, spiritually completed in India, and there Murshid explains that why it was, so to speak, grafted on the already existing mysticism and spiritual work which already was alive in India for so many centuries. Now, the one great distinction, and so of the Western spiritual tradition in India was that the Western spiritual tradition, having so much of a religious tradition in it, Zoroaster, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, that it was world accepting. The ideal of India in Hinduism and Buddhism very often is world renouncing. You have to renounce the world in order to achieve a spiritual goal, a bit like the Christian monks and nuns, etc. But in the Western religions, in Islam and the previous foregoing religions, it is accept the God-given world. If God has given you this world, accept it and live through that world. In other words, Sufism was not only a mystical tradition, searching for the fulfillment of the soul's life. It also was a culture, a civilization, an expression in beauty of everything the human being could produce. Because in precisely that sense of beauty, there is a fulfillment of its own. That same thing we find in Mahmoud Inayat Khan's teachings. There is that mystical essence which is achieved in a certain progress, in a certain way of going along spiritual deepening, but there is also that whole teaching on how to articulate your life in the world as with a spiritual essence within it, with a human life, human culture, human civilization, but always with that spiritual dimension alongside it and within it. And if that is not reckoned with, then you live in a very different world. Today we all have to struggle in this world which is, as put two things Murshid always condemned, was materialism and commercialism. And precisely today we're in this world where these two values predominate. So the challenge for us, followers of Mahmoud Inayat Khan's work, is precisely to have that sense of the fulfillment of civilization, of culture, also in the spiritual side, always adding that spiritual awareness to it, from which every higher development proceeds and to which it again, in which again it finds its fulfillment. So, as I said, avoid Sufi message, Sufi messenger. And the other thing, which is in a sense even more deceiving, is universal Sufism. And there's already a few years, in 2016, Nawad Pasnak made the very right, they said, well, if our Sufism is universal Sufism, then what about the great universalists of the past? Jalaluddin Rumi, in his famous Masnavi, Ibn al-Arabi, in his teachings, all that is as universal as you can be. Only in Mahmoud Inayat Khan's time it is articulated and formed and expressed in the terms of the modern world. But universalism is the essential characteristic of all mysticism. As long, as Mahmoud Inayat also says, mysticism is beyond any religious form. Every religion has its origin and has its fulfillment in religious realization of an individual illuminated soul. It is not something which is different. The method may be different, the terminology may be different. The realization of the inner reality of the soul's life, that is universal. Or in those systems we deny the idea of the soul, the essence of being, may be said, being that which reaches fulfillment. So instead of the Sufi message or universal Sufism, what I've been pleading for, on the basis of that quote of Mahmoud Inayat Khan himself, which I just mentioned, I say Mahmoud Inayat Khan's Indian Sufism. And when we say Indian Sufism, it means those two great currents of spiritual life, the one, as I just mentioned already, coming from the West and the Western religions, the Oriental tradition of Buddhism and Hinduism as such. Both of them are united in this Sufism, and how and why? Purely analytically, you can say that Sufism, original Arabic Sufism and Persian Sufism, the philosophical background has been Neoplatonism. And of course, in India, the philosophical background is the Vedanta. Now, in Mahmoud Inayat Khan's work, you find these two together. And so there you have really a kind of, well, as I say, I avoid the term Universal Sufism because that excludes too many of the great Sufis of the past. But you have an Indian Sufism, which in itself combines, at least in its background, these two great philosophical systems. And very often you find passages in Mahmoud Inayat Khan where you have to remember which system he's now speaking of, or how is he integrating these two systems in this particular way. That's one thing. Another thing is that you always have to remember in reading Mahmoud Inayat Khan's work that it is beyond what the rationality or the analytic quality of the mind. It goes beyond, it goes from the mind into the heart, which means that his work is poetic, it is elusive, and it is evocative. What you cannot express rationally, analytically in a discourse, you can evoke in poetry. You can evoke in that which goes beyond, something which you only can perceive, you cannot rationalize. So that again is the way in which you have to approach and understand and experience Mahmoud Inayat Khan's work. Yes. Now, and just one more matter-of-fact point. The Mahmoud Inayat Khan's work in its totality now has been published in what I regard as the spine of his Sufism, which is the Nekbacht edition of his complete works, chronologically ordered and verbatim. Of course, every text which is published, the best possible speaker has to be edited before he's being published. If you write an article or a chapter, whatever, you have to edit. Not in this case. You find Mahmoud's original verbatim lectures as they were reported by the people who wrote it down. And so that is intended to cover the entire output of Mahmoud's speeches from 1922 till 1926. These have been completed. The earlier series will also be, thank you, will also be issued in due time. There you have the totality, and that is what I like to call the Nekbacht publications are the background of Mahmoud Inayat Khan's Sufism in the future, from which all more general reading matters can be derived, more edit editions can be derived, etc., etc. They are, of course, research editions, but they have their own great interest and value. Now, Mahmoud Inayat Khan's Sufism comprises two things. What you could, of course, the essence is mysticism. In addition to mysticism, you have what you could call the way of life, the philosophy, the ethics, the cultural concerns, etc., which are very, very important because they too have a sense of, carry a sense of fulfillment in themselves. Maybe not everybody will feel that they are able to have a complete case in mysticism and everything that involves, but there is a much personal fulfillment in his cultural teachings, in his ethical teachings, in his contemplative philosophy, in everything in which his Sufism is expressed in words. They always carry that inspiration of the visionary spirit Mahmoud Inayat Khan was. And so they always carry that sense of fulfillment which you would expect to find in mysticism. You always find them in his other teachings as well. But you always never forget that in his teachings, that mystical element has always to be reckoned with. It's not something that gives a series of instructions and teaching and that is it. No, always add that dimension in which it finds its fulfillment, from which it proceeds, and which inspires it. And therefore, all those teachings as well carry their own sense of fulfillment. And for every murid, every person who reads Inayat Khan in general, what you derive from it, what gives you your satisfaction, your sense of fulfillment, that's meant for you. Now, mysticism itself, again, comprises two different aspects. One is the esoteric one, and one is the metaphysical one. Now, the esoteric one is what you might briefly call the yoga, the training system of the murid on the spiritual path. The thing many of you who are murids know about that. And so there you get the different stages of mystical training. Normally there are 7 stages, and the first 4 really carry the essence of this spiritual development. One being the what they call the stage of namaz, meaning the stage where, mind you, Sufism is a theistic form of religion. That's another subject, I won't go into that further. But it being theistic, it starts with a religious basis. You will find it in much of Murshid's work, where he speaks about the God ideal, which in a sense is the Indian idol turned into an inward idol, an inward ideal. And so that ideal is developed, that is that dualism. There, the divine reality is still pictured in an anthropomorphic shape. That shape is the one which you create yourself. But you have to have some kind of transmission from the ultimate divine reality into your personal awareness. And in your everyday awareness, there you have to start with what all religions have always done, an anthropomorphic way of comprehending. It is a transmission. I always like it, and I apologize, I've repeated that so often that I apologize for those who have already heard it so many times. But it is really your wireless transmitters, it is your radio, it is your television. You have to have that television, you have to have that radio in you. And you can say, I'm so advanced that I can receive the ether by myself, well, go ahead. But the normal person needs a radio, needs a television to get whatever sound or information he wants to achieve. So there you have to have that image of yourself. That which your religion has offered you, you have to interiorize into yourself. Whether it is, you have to turn, well, let's say the idol into an ideal. You have to do the God of your religion or your theology into that personal divine awareness of your own being. How does it live in yourself? Never mind you follow and you believe the religion, okay. How does it operate in yourself? Through your prayers, through your concentration, through the inwardness. It becomes your property. That's the first stage. And that is what you call the namaz stage. Then the second stage, you know very well, is the stage of the vazifa, or the mantra, as they say in India, the repetition of sacred word. Now, in Sufism, the sacred words are the so-called Asma al-Husna, the most beautiful names of God. Now, if you say about the qualities of God, that you already gone beyond the purely anthropomorphic idol in yourself, you have gone into the qualities. Let us say the example of our fellow, if we meet a person whom we meet and we make a first acquaintance with somebody, okay, he or she may have the exterior characteristic, and you meet exteriorly. But your contact with the person will be determined not by his or her exterior, by what the mind produces. The thoughts, the feelings, the insight, the inwardness of that person, that is what attracts. What attracts you in your friend is not that outside appearance, that be whatever he or she may be. It is the inner, the very thing which you cannot touch. You can touch his hand or whatever. You cannot touch the qualities of his mind. You cannot touch the qualities, they are unseen, the quality of his heart. And still that mind and that heart convey your togetherness, convey the link which there is between you. So if that is already the case with human beings, Now that's the same thing with your God ideal. You abandon that outward form, that anthropomorphic form, and you focus on the qualities of God, the merciful, the compassionate, the noble, the help, the support, whatever qualities there are. You all know them as vazifas, as mantras. You focus on those divine qualities. It's a step further in divine realization. Then the third stage is the zikr. The zikr, that again, La ilaha illallah, nothing exists but God. It is originally a religious formula, but the way in which it's used is in a very, very different way. It is not that there is no God, but no Godhead, but the only God. No, it means to say nothing ultimately is existence except the divine being, except the impulse of divinity which creates this manifestation, and which in particular is at the basis of the human soul. The human soul, which is the impulse of every human life, and that human soul which can be that impulse because in itself is hidden that divine spark, that ultimate divine reality which manifests in and through the soul and creates the possibility for a human being to live as a human being. So, although it, of course, penetrates all life, the divine impulse is the condition for all manifestation. But in particular, it is present in what we call the human soul in our Western tradition. So there again, you have this sense of going beyond the attributes. You are no longer busy with God as a being, as a human form, no longer as human attributes, but as the essence of life. That is the point of the zikr. So, and then one further way of perpetuating the zikr, of not alone sitting down and repeating it at a certain time, at a certain place, as often as you can, it is something to carry along with you. And you carry it along with you on your breath. Because that breath, you know, you have to breathe anyway. You can't help that. So if now and then, in that breath, you repeat this form, except in the opposite form, Allahu la ilaha illallah. Don't breathe in, la ilaha illallah, and expire, illallah. So be sure that you do it the right way, and the right way is the opposite. As a zikr, you do la ilaha illallah. Nothing exists but divine reality. But if you breathe it in, of course you do it the opposite. You Allahu. I breathe in at the same time, from my inner awareness, I draw that awareness to my consciousness. Allahu la ilaha, and nothing is real except that ultimate divine reality which penetrates everything. So that is and those are the four stages, as I said, namaz, vazifa, zikr, fikr, of the essence of Sufism. Then in addition, almost supplementary, you get three things which are typically Indian. And these three different ones are, well, I should not say optional, but they are kind of particular specialisms in a particular context, if the time, the inclination, etc. Kasab, shaghl, amal. They are there, they are valuable, they are precious, but they are, so to speak, a supplement, an additional thing which those who are deep into mystical realization, have the time and possibility to do so, can further their experience in this line of illuminative progress. So these are, I think, and now, how do you go along with it in practice? You have these different stages, I'm sure you all know them, of concentration, contemplation, meditation, and realization. Meditation, that means to be able to focus on one point and be losing the attention for yourself by focusing on that one point. We already talked about how that's done in Persian poetry. You can go up and be absorbed in that beauty of that poetry and so forget about your limited self and everything which ties you to the restrictions of this earthly life. So that's concentration. Contemplation is a stage further, which is not focusing on something concrete, but something abstract, a thought, a value, something which you cannot grasp, but which you focus on. That meditation is going to further stage in abandoning the focus on either the object or the subject or the ideal, just what that has done to you, how that your soul, your spirit, your mind has been cleared by this process, and living in that sense of awareness. And realization is then, of course, beyond mysticism, a kind of permanency of becoming that which you have been focusing on throughout that system of further development. So that, and those stages are in our Sufism that have specific method, which all of you probably know, but maybe not all of you practice. That is that system of fana. Fana means, in this particular context, that means to go beyond. And that dates from the tradition that mysticism and general spiritual teachings were transmitted not through books, but orally, through a teacher. So that first stage of fana was called fana fi sheikh. That means passing by your own selfhood by focusing on what the sheikh has to teach you, by what the sheikh transmitted you in words, in forms of understanding. Now the danger here, of course, is obvious. For many people, it becomes the sheikh who becomes the object, rather than what the sheikh teaches. That's also a bit easier. You don't need to understand this. You just have a person and you think, yeah, I admire the person. What the point is that you absorb what that person has to convey to you in spiritual values, in philosophical contemplation, whatever. Now today, in our Hazrat Inayat Khan's teaching, thank God, that is no longer necessary, to this extent that, as I already said, all Murshid's work is there. Murshid's work is going from brief but extremely inspiring aphorisms, short poems. You all know the Gayan Vadanichtan, this book of these aphorisms and poems, up to his lectures and the extremely memorable way in which his lectures are articulated. I already said that the typical Indian way of the guru sitting with a circle of murids and speaking very profound on the one hand and very incidentally on the other, very playfully on the other. Master that style which Murshid had, because that's very off-putting for people in the West. People in the West think if you speak about some very subject like philosophy or subject of mysticism or subject that's profound, it has to be serious and solemn from the very first word to the last. Cannot be funny, cannot be witty, and certainly cannot be light-minded and full of anecdotes and jokes of whatever kind. That's not India. That's not India. That's why I keep insisting Murshid's Indian Sufism. You know, in his Hinduism, which is a system rather than just a religion, it's a system. And there, you know, it's the only system in which mysticism and religion are not two different poles of their religious world, but where they fall together. You all know stories about Krishna as a young boy doing all kind of mischief, and you know, Rama with all his dramatic life and all that kind of thing. That playfulness is there. That playfulness, which is also a kind of qualification, a kind of relativity, is there in that system. And so that you find in the Indian Guru, that you find in Hazrat Inayat Khan, in the type of his teachings. So there you have again, what you have, you practice your fana fi sheikh, not necessarily by a person who teaches you, but by these illuminating words of Hazrat Inayat Khan, which you find in such richness, available in so many different ways. Then the next stage, fana fi sheikh, is fana fi rasul. That is already focusing on an abstract ideal. So Again, that is a further stage, an abstract idea that may be any kind of prophet or divine being you feel you can relate to. It may be whatever is a source of inspiration, not at any concrete level, not even at a text or a lecture, but on that which inspires you at that level of the ideal. Then after that, Fanafi Rasul, you get Fanafillah. And that is the absorption in divine reality. That is again beyond the further, very fulfilling stage of mysticism, going beyond that, that awareness of either objects or ideals, but living into that, that kind of attunement which is created by having absorbed all these values at the earlier stages. Fanafillah is a kind of fulfillment, the kind of fulfillment which in the world-renouncing religions, the non-theistic systems, is called nirvana or mukti. Mukti, yani liberation, nirvana, of course, that, so to speak, merging into a totality. That's a Sufi system called fanafillah, absorption in divinity, in divine reality. But Sufism, being Sufism, carries another tradition with it as well. And beyond these stages, which for the world renouncing and the non-theistic systems are, so to speak, the utter fulfillment, in Sufism, in the Baqabillah, it's surviving in the being of God, is again, so the survival in that divine being through that sense of love, that sense of, you know, what the religions set a focus for people devoted to one another, that devotion gets a certain immortality. Well, the road is one which you do along all these different stages. But there you get that surprising thing, if you have that nirvana, or that mukti, or that fanafillah. And certainly Murshid comes in different of his works, and he tells, you know, about it in this way, and that in an esoteric way. But mind you, the esoteric system is, so to speak, the Murshid's cosmological metaphysics are an extension of his esoteric one, because all this is based on Murshid's personal inspiration against the background of everything which, of course, he assembled from what had been there already. So Murshid gives this wonderful simile, this wonderful extraordinary thing that he says, gives this, again, what you cannot express rationally, you express poetically. So he tells about the drop in the mountain snow, which turns into a little rivulet, a little stream, turning into, merging into a river, that river going into the sea, or into the ocean. Well, that is the typical imagery you find, of course, in all these mystical systems. But then Murshid says the assumption of absorption into that ultimate ocean of reality, there you get Mahmoud Inayat Khan saying, yes, that drop is assimilated into the ocean, but in that ocean, it draws all the magnetism of the ocean into itself. And says Mahmoud, that drop is again revived anew. It gets anew, the very magnetism of that ocean is there. So in other words, there is beyond the absorption in divine reality, there is again that sense of joy, not only the peace of the ultimate reality, but also the joy. And how is that achieved? That is achieved by exactly that idea of fana, of abandoning the empirical self in order to focus on something in gratitude, in a sense of fulfillment. And there again, you know, in mysticism, starts from the premise not only that there is that ultimate divine reality, but something of that divine is present in every soul. So in other words, there is something in the human soul as well that directs it to its fulfillment. For some, that will be the ultimate serenity of divinity. For some, it will be that joy of fulfillment in, those who have loved, those you have loved in such a way that you abandoned yourself because of your love, because that love has helped you to abandon your empirical selfhood. There again, there is the survival in God at a very, very different level from what the religions have always said, still with a similar effect at a higher level. I'm afraid I've talked too much already and said all these things which really should not be said, they should be experienced. But anyway, I think, may I stop here? Too much, maybe. Oh, if I haven't said it. Very undeserved, but thank you anyway.
Well, a very big thank you and a bow of appreciation for sharing with us something of the lineage, the silsile, not only from Murshid Inayat Khan, but back through India, Persia, Arabia, and the blending of that with Mediterranean, European philosophy and practice. And also a big thank you for the book.
I've not written it at all.
Lovely book with interviews with Sheikh Mahmoud about his experiences through his childhood, through your adult life, and your reflections on the path that you have walked.
Thank you.
And I only pray, Mahmoud, that when I get to your age, I have the clarity that you still have.
Oh, thank you.
and also the openness of heart and generosity you still have.
Thank you very so much.
I just want to offer some words to link what you've shared with us about the roots, the depths of our blessed tradition, and its perfume, and its fragrance.
That's right. Yeah.
It's unique.
Indeed. Yeah.
Its unique smell and feel. With linking it to our journey this week, the Sufi way, Love's Caravan. Because we're sitting here today celebrating 20 years of our current peer, Elias, who's been in the seat, the hot seat, of transmitting the tariqah from one generation to another. And also the 20th years of dear Sitara Brutnell, who, in her quiet teaching and her enormous holding, held the Sufi way after the sudden passing of Murshid Fazl, who I know you knew well in many different guises.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
And we're giving thanks for the wisdom they both have brought in recent years in their very different styles and what they have both taught us, but also what they have shown us. And it's not just an appreciation of them as wise and generous teachers and leaders, because as you say in your book, I love this bit in Sheikh Mahmoud's book. He says, unfortunately, we do need organizations. Sadly, he says, we need organizations. He says with this lovely line, because the perfume without the bottle loses its smell. But if the we have to be very careful, and Mahmoud and I were discussing this, that you can end up idolizing the bottle or even its brand name. And then you also lose the perfume.
That's right, that's right.
And we're not just giving thanks for the teachings of Pir Elias, Pir Mashida, Satara, but for the baraka, the flow of wisdom, the flow of grace that comes through Hazrat Inayat Khan, and the whole silsile. And as you know, there's a tradition, not much practiced now in our tariqah, but of naming the teachers going back and making a bow to those who have, in the words of Hazrat Inayat Khan, have held aloft the light of wisdom in the darkness of ignorance. And boy, do we need that today. And so, let us all, and I invite all of us to give a bow and to give thanks, not just to Sheikh Sheikh Mahmoud, Pir Elias, but back through the tariqah, through Pir Elias to Pir Mashida Satara, to Murshid Fazl Inayat Khan, some of us knew well in many guises, to his teacher, Murshid Mushraf Khan, Murshid Inayat Khan's youngest brother, Murshid Ali Khan, brought great music that you write about and healing.
That's right. That's right.
Great healer. Yeah. To Sheikh Alma Sheikh Mahbub Khan, your father, younger brother, to Pir Murshid Hazrat Inayat Khan, and then to his teacher, Hazrat Sayyid Muhammad Abu Hashim Madani Shishti, who was his great teacher in India. And then through Madani Shishti, the great line of Shishti teachers who brought the fragrance, the perfume from Persia to India.
Yeah, yeah.
And back through those teachers, back through Ali to the Prophet, may his name be blessed, to Jesus, to Moses, to Abraham, to Adam, to the many indigenous teachers, the first people who brought the barakah, which has been there throughout, the grace of wisdom and teaching that has flowed through many to us. And we need to honor that river.
Yeah.
But then there's a lovely, one of my favorite lines from John O'Donoghue. Some of you may know John O'Donoghue, the great Catholic poet and mystic, who wrote, "I would love to live as a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding."
Yeah.
Such a lovely, I'll read it again. I would love to live as a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. And in some ways our silsile, the line of barakah that's come down through us, through many teachers, is also like a river, constantly surprised by its own unfolding. Yes, and your book talks of many surprises that you have lived through. Some more painful than others, some joyous. But, here we're in the Netherlands, and it would be foolish to say that the Rhine was Dutch, or French, or German, or Swiss, or Austrian. And we recognize these are just names given to the locations that the continuous flow of water that never ends passes through. And as I was writing that, I thought, I doubt whether the water even thinks of itself as the River Rhine.
very well said. Said indeed, yes.
For we recognize that the Rhine is ever changing. As Murshid Fazal has said, Sufism is always changing, and that's how it stays the same. And we recognize that, sometimes the stream is cascading in dramatic turbulence. Sometimes it's seemingly still, but still flowing. Sometimes a narrow brook, at other times wide and spread out over a floodplain. And we might ask, what is the purpose of this river? I would answer, its purpose is to carry the water. But the water is not its own. For the water falls by grace from the heavens. But to faithfully carry this water back to its source, disappearing, as you said, into the ocean. But also the river's purpose is not just to carry the water to the ocean, but to make that water a blessing to all that the river meets on its course, on its journey. The trees, the plants that grow along the banks, the birds, the animals that come to drink its waters, the fields it floods, and through which it gives birth to new crops, and the many humans whose lives depend on its continued blessing. The river is a fundamental source of life, without which our bodies and that of the plants, the trees, the birds, and the animals could not survive. Likewise is our Sil Soleil.
That's right.
A fundamental source of spiritual life without which wisdom perishes. For it carries the baraka, by grace, the wisdom that is beyond any of our cognitive understanding. From teacher to teacher, and from Murshid to Murid. And I loved what you said about, in these circles, it is the direct teaching. The words may be the vehicle, but the words are not what is being taught.
That's right. Yeah.
Another great poet, T.S. Eliot, wrote, "Where is the knowledge we have lost in information?
Yes. Yeah.
And where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge?" And now, as we face the polycrisis of our time, which has many aspects, I will ask you about this shortly, but the climate crisis, world inequality, increasing mental health, prejudice, war, loss of biodiversity. We're faced with realizing that all these great challenges of our time, the bigger challenges is that they are all interconnected.
Yeah.
We cannot solve any of them without the others.
That's right. Yeah.
And even greater is the meta-crisis, that at heart all these polycrises are symptoms of our inability so far to mature human consciousness. And this is the great work of our time that I think you speak to. And I think, indeed, Murshid Inayat Khan was speaking to. So our Sil Soleil is not just, as I think you've indicated, for personal development. This is where it starts. For our personal, spiritual development of our character. but about how all of us engage in contributing to the maturing of each other's consciousnesses, to human consciousness, wherever we find ourselves. And the harmony that Mahmoud Inayat Khan talks so much about, to create the harmony between peoples and between the human and the more than human world. And I so love it, Mahmoud, that in your book, right at the end, you quote Mahmoud Inayat Khan, and I thought I have to just read this bit you quoted, because this was Mahmoud Inayat Khan in 1922, 102 years ago, in KatwijkaanZee, a year before he went back to India, where he died. Far too young, but and for our sake, but probably the right time for him.
Yes, yes, of course.
And here in KatwijkaanZee, he said this, and what extraordinary, how far was he ahead of his time, when he said, in spite of all the progress of modern civilization that has been made in all departments of life, such as commerce, industry, politics, and economics, the question still remains whether we have really progressed. If one observes the superficiality of the lives which we live today in the so-called civilized parts of the world, which actually echoes what later Mahatma Gandhi said when he came to London. He was asked what he thought about British civilization. He said, I think it would be a good idea.
That's wonderful. I didn't know that.
So if we observe in the so-called civilized parts of the world, one will certainly find that we are far removed from nature, both within us and without. And we have become exiles from the ideal state of life. As I like to say, we are all indigenous orphans, orphaned from the world we have been born into. The prejudice, he says, the hatred and distrust that exists between nations, whether friends or foes, every nation being absorbed in its own interest, regardless of the people in general. What an extraordinary statement for our time. Have reflected, he goes on to say, have reflected on the mentality of individuals and have made life difficult for both rich and poor. Everywhere one turns, one sees material strife. Every ideal, every principle has become sacrificed to it. What great words, and thank you for bringing those to us. So before I ask the first question, I'd just like to say I would love to live as a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. And I would love our tariqah to live as a river flows, carried by the surprise of its unfolding. And for us to remember that we are the womb of the unfolding Soleil. Our job is to receive the water, but not to forget that that water is not for us. It is for us to flow it on to those who come after us. And for us to give also a deep bow to those who will carry on, who will be the next stage of the river. And it is our job given that we are leaving them much bigger challenges than anything you or I in our privileged lives had to face. We are leaving them much bigger challenges, that we have a great debt of responsibility. And this tariqa is there to help the world find the consciousness that is needed to face the great challenges that life has given us. So thank you, Mahmoud.
Well, thank you very much for your beautiful words. Thank you.
And let me open the questions by asking, what would you see, given what I've just said, is the biggest contribution that the tariqa, the silsile, can bring now to the next generations that come after us?
Yes, I would say that of course, that whole idea of adding that mystical dimension to the world and the culture of today is the essential thing. On the other hand, of course, that is something which is difficult for people to grasp. And therefore, all those teachings of Muhyiddin on the way of life, on the way of how to deal with one another, and everything, the social teachings of Muhyiddin Khan, which recently be published also in a large volume of its own, and all these kind of things, the social-cultural aspect, to be presented in such a way that the mystical dimension which informs them, which they proceed from and which they again return to, is more or less automatically added to that which we seek to convey to others. And if you convey things, mostly you have to talk in terms either deriving of religion or deriving of some philosophical concept or deriving of the practical necessities of everyday life. And all these things offer an entry of deepening into particular all these matters which occur in everyday life, confrontations on the one hand, facilities on the other, and to be able to add that sense of the unseen reality even at that stage. And everything is encapsulated in an unseen reality. Also those things which otherwise we value as the positive remnants in a very difficult and very destructive kind of life. But those positive elements, in a sense, gain their value by that kind of unseen element, which is the creative element. Murshid's standard idea, simal there, is of course that of the breath. You do not see the breath, but it is more essential to human life than even food or drink. And so there is something which, in the human personality as well, as I just said also just now, there is some element in the human personality which is not seen, but which is determining for our relationships to another person. And if that could be just ingrained in people, that would be something.
So there's something about an engaged mysticism.
Yes, that's very nicely put. That's very nicely put, yes. Good, well said, yeah.
The mysticism that has to work with our own character, which Inayat Khan talks a lot about,
exactly.
but also works with the challenges that life presents us with every day.
Exactly, yes. The awareness of the unseen and the creative potential of the unseen in our normal social and cultural relationships. If that much can be made clear to people, then already that would be a big step forward. Because today many social and cultural activities are related to materialism, are related to purely material elements, and thereby certainly do not develop in a very propitious way. So that creative element always proceeds from the unseen, and that is something we might, I think, add to the awareness of social life as we experience from day to day.